that same day, 2 of the disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, 'Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?' Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead, as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, 'Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over.' So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, 'Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?' That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered there together. They were saying, 'The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon.' Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them and the breaking of the bread." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Surprise, surprise, the place we will go when we open our eyes. There was no surprise to a lot of people that in the year 2000, Time magazine ran a cover that illustrated the man of the century. There was no surprise who that person was. Does anybody remember who it was in 2000? Albert Einstein. There was no surprise because Albert had made many, many improvements to the area of physics. He was a person of precision, of great intellectual strength. He discovered so many things and came up with this thing of quantum theory, the law of thermodynamics. If you paid attention in physics, you probably would have heard a few of those things. But there was one formula that he really came up with, which is E equals mc squared. So there's no surprise that Albert Einstein was given the title the man of the century. But there are a few little stories about Dr. Einstein that people are not aware of, such as the time when he was taking a train trip from Princeton. He was in the train car, and the conductor is walking down the aisle, and he's coming around. In those days, they still punch tickets. And he came up to Dr. Einstein, who then looked around for his ticket. He couldn't find it in his pocket, right there, where he kept all his pens. And so he then went in his jacket pocket. They weren't there. He shifted and checked his back pocket. He looked in his little briefcase. Couldn't find him anywhere. And the conductor said, "Dr. Einstein, don't worry about it. It's okay. I know who you are. In fact, everyone on this train knows who you are. It's okay if you can't find your ticket." And with that, Dr. Einstein thanked him. The conductor continued to go punching tickets until he's about to leave that car, and he looked back over his shoulder and he saw Albert on his hands and his knees searching for his lost ticket. The conductor hurried on back to him and said, "Dr. Einstein, really, it's no worry. Don't worry about it. I know who you are, and I'm sure you bought a ticket. To which Albert stood up and said, quote, "Young man, I too know who I am. What I don't know is where I am going." Surprise, surprise. Someone once said that life without God is like an unsharpened pencil. It has no point. I believe when you hear a little bit of the voice of Albert as he got a little closer to his own mortality, it's interesting that the land of physics became something of a distance of his, and he began to embrace a little bit of a, may I say, theological speak. He began to think about his life and where he was actually going. Was it just his earthly contributions and coming up with theories and anecdotes and mathematical equations, or was there something more to it? It should come as no surprise to us as Christians about where we are going. We know the point to this life, and everything points to Christ. As a Christian, that is fundamentally what we're all about. To be followers of Christ, to be the little Christ within, the Holy Spirit dwells within us. So if we know where we are going, why do we fumble around trying to find our ticket? We'll get back to that. No surprise. You know, a lot of people are watching us. They are, because we say that we're Christians and that we believe in God and that we follow Jesus. And already the empirical standard is that you have to add up. You have to not only be good, you have to do good, because that's the way the world looks at it. If you are so great as a Christian, you have to measure up to the expectations. So what are our true expectations to which Christ gives us? Christ has revealed the answer to us, and yet there are times where we still search for that ticket to which we can give the right response to the world around us. I remember we talked a little bit about faith, where faith is belief in what is not seen, but yet is understood. And yet today, the gospel is telling us to open our eyes. What does that mean? It's the eyes of our faith. Our faith sees. It measures, it interprets, it looks at all the dimensions and allows us to be able to get on that transit of departure and arrival to where Christ has aligned us with Him. The problem is sometimes we want to get off the train. The problem is sometimes we get a little lost. And why is that? Well, the conductor of our life, which is Jesus, He still comes down the middle aisle, and He is looking at you, and He is asking if He can help you. And fundamentally, He wants to make sure you're at peace and that you know where you are going. It's been a tough week, I'll be honest. A lot of these questions have come up. We've had some deaths in the family. We've had some surgical procedures in the family. Not just my family, I mean my church family. We've had some rough goes, and yet along this is a journey, a ride to which we're all the passengers and asking for God to reveal Himself in this mysterious place to which we sojourn. Why do we misplace things? Well, maybe it's because of our own insecurities, it's our own vices and temptations and challenges and our sinful ways, maybe, to where we lose scope of where we're supposed to be going. That's why we come on Sunday, so that things will be revealed to us. The conductor came in the middle of two of these disciples on the road to Emmaus, which was 7 miles away from Jerusalem. It was inside of them, this whole epic struggle, and wondering why they didn't reach the destination that they were foretold would happen. They were disappointed, they were frustrated, they were a little angry, they had a lot of mixed feelings. They wondered why they didn't see Jesus any longer, and they were frustrated with the reports about the women who saw an empty tomb, and all this is adding up. And they're just going, where is it all? Doesn't make sense. I don't see the E equals MC squared, says the disciples. And yet they found this stranger. Can I say that one more time? It was Jesus. He was with them on the road to Emmaus. And they didn't know who he was. That's odd. That is so odd. And then they ask him, have you not heard of what has happened to Jesus of Nazareth? And then they tell the whole story, and there he is, just taking it all in. The great conductor that Jesus is. And after they're done, he says, I know who you are. And I know where you're going. Let me tell you where you've been. He goes all the way back to the Old Testament, and he bridges it, and he brings them along from all the stops along that train trip. He is saying, this is where you've been, and this is where you are, and this is where you're going. But they still didn't know who he was. But they yearned to hear more, and they knew that he was going to leave them, and they invited him to dinner, and the story goes that he came into dinner, and you see in the illustration that something mysterious, superhuman happens that is way beyond what we can discover in physics. And when did Jesus, when should I say this. When did the disciples see Jesus? When? When was it? You know the answer. There was an act. There's the breaking of the bread. Why was that so important? Was it that ticket? Was that what was being punched? What is being revealed is where God comes into our earthly existence in a way to which once again reaffirms his sovereignty. He has us on the right tracks. He's got this under control. And I think this past week, and for many of us, we need to hear that message time and time again. We need to know that in the misplaced feelings and thoughts of our own lives, that he has this under control, and he is leading us and conducting the business of this world. We come here to this church religiously. We do it as one body. And we hear those words, and we see the breaking of the bread. And it is a moment of where our eyes, tied into our faith, are opened once more. It's okay if there are times where you're a little misplaced and you can't quite put your finger on it. But the hope, the sure hope and understanding is that Christ is right there with you. He didn't put you on the train and say, have a good trip. He said, I am going to take it with you. And I'm going to help you get to your destination. Dearly beloved, when we stay on those tracks, everything does eventually make sense, add up, and works out. We simply have to be faithful. And when we are, be ready for a little bit of surprise. Because surprise, surprise, the places we will go when we rely on Jesus, because he helps you and me to open our eyes. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.